I'm Iris Tao in for Steve Lance. The Senate has passed a stopgap bill to avoid a government shutdown, and Democratic lawmakers are divided over the outcome. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has the story.
See what happens over in the Senate. There are still undecided and undeclared senators, and we anxiously await that vote.
Is it time for new leadership in the Senate?
Next question.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries held a press conference at the Capitol this Friday despite the House being out of session. The Minority Leader refused to rule out calls for new leadership for Senate Democrats.
Clearly, this is a Hobson's choice. The CR is a bad bill. But as bad as the CR is, I believe allowing Donald Trump to take even much more power via a government shutdown is a far worse option.
Democrats who opposed the bill argued that a pushback to Republican policies must be set on the record.
We have different analyses of this moment, but actually this is critical, that we show that there is a force in America. We have power in the Senate. People want to see us use it, and we need to push back, and we need to have all of these bad things that he's doing right now, not give our stamp of approval to it.
While moderates on the right and the left opted to keep the government running.
You're talking about people who have been railing against Elon Musk and the Trump administration over reductions in force of the federal employees, and now they basically want to put all of them out of work by shutting down the government. So that seems to be, I don't know how you reconcile those two positions.
They can yell and fundraise off of that, but I'll be the only Democrat that's going to tell America the truth about shutting the government down, and that would be a f***ing disaster.
The bill is now headed to the president's desk. If President Trump signs it, it will fund government through fiscal year 2025. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
And President Trump today speaking at the Justice Department, the first president to do so in a decade. Illegal immigration, violent crime, and what he calls a weaponized justice system, all major points of contention. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
We're restoring fair, equal, and impartial justice under the constitutional rule of law.
Major changes to the country's legal system, a highlight of President Trump's Friday speech at the Department of Justice, with a focus on stopping violent crime, particularly that of the largest cartels from Latin America.
We've caught hundreds of them, the Venezuelan gang, which is as bad as it gets.
Last month, Trump designated those cartels as foreign terrorist groups. Since taking office in January, the Trump administration extradited nearly 30 cartel leaders from Mexico. Trump also promised an end to what he says has been the weaponization of the justice system.
Unfortunately, in recent years, a corrupt group of hacks and radicals within the ranks of the American government obliterated the trust and goodwill built up over generations. They weaponized the vast powers of our intelligence and law enforcement agencies to try and thwart the will of the American people.
In many cases, allegedly targeting religious believers, January 6 protesters, and himself.
They spied on my campaign, launched one hoax and disinformation operation after another, broke the law on a colossal scale, persecuted my family, staff, and supporters, raided my home, Mar-a-Lago, and did everything within their power to prevent me from becoming the President of the United States.
Under the previous administration, the FBI and DOJ led several investigations and prosecutions against Trump. Trump also praised federal Judge Eileen Cannon, who dismissed his classified documents case. He said Cannon has faced a litany of pushback.
I'm so impressed with Judge Cannon in Florida, how strong she was, how she held up. It actually made her more resolute than anything I've seen. I mean, it was amazing because they were hitting her so hard. It was so sad to watch this.
The Trump administration's also cracking down on illegal protests on college campuses. They revoked $400 million in federal grants to Columbia University last week, saying that the university failed to address harassment of Jewish students.
We are also looking at whether Columbia's handling of earlier incidents violated civil rights laws and included terrorism crimes. This is long overdue.
This comes shortly after the State Department reaffirmed its role in revoking the visas of anyone who supports terrorists. Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Bill that will classify all fentanyl-related drugs as Schedule I substances. That's the category for drugs that are most addictive and deemed unacceptable for medical use. In an 84-16 vote, the Hold Fentanyl Act cleared the upper chamber with overwhelming bipartisan support. The bill seeks to close the loopholes that allow drug traffickers to smuggle drugs like fentanyl into the U.S. It would also put knockoff versions of the drug under the same rules used for fentanyl itself. In 2023 alone, more than 100,000 people died from drug overdose in America, and roughly 70% of those deaths traced back to synthetic opioids like fentanyl. The Hold Fentanyl Act will now head to the House for a vote. Then it could become law once signed by the president. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia will spare Ukrainian forces in Kursk if they surrender. It comes as President Trump urges him to avoid a terrible massacre and as the U.S. is working to broker a ceasefire. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pastar has the war update.
Special envoy to Russia and Ukraine, Steve Witkoff, was in Moscow on Thursday. He presented a U.S. proposal for a ceasefire in Ukraine. On Friday, President Trump said the talks went well, adding that there's a very good chance that this horrible, bloody war can finally come to an end. Russia is currently advancing on the battlefield, and its forces are reportedly making significant progress in the Kursk region. Trump commented on the situation, saying thousands of Ukrainian troops are completely surrounded by the Russian military. I have strongly requested to President Putin that their lives be spared. This would be a horrible massacre. Putin responded to Trump's appeal on Friday.
We understand President Trump's call to be guided by humanitarian considerations. I would like to emphasize that if they lay down their arms and surrender, they will be guaranteed life and decent treatment.
Also on Friday, G7 foreign ministers issued a joint statement focused heavily on Russia and Ukraine. The diplomats warned Moscow to agree to a ceasefire or face further sanctions, such as oil price caps. Secretary of State Marco Rubio commented on the possibility of sanctions after Friday's meeting.
As far as U.S. sanctions are concerned, the president's made clear, the president on 2 occasions in the past week has reminded everybody that the U.S. has these options available to it, but he doesn't want to do that right now because he's in the hopes of attracting people, both sides, to a process where we can negotiate peace.
At the summit, diplomats also talked about the threat posed by China. The U.S. asked for the final statement to include tougher language on China.
The Chinese Communist Party has pursued both economic and foreign policies that allow them to benefit from all the good things about the global order, but ignore all of its responsibilities.
Rubio added that this could lead to the Western world being overly dependent on China. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
To discuss President Trump's tariffs to address unfair trade practices, we're happy to have on Dan Ikenson, former director of Cato Institute's Center for Trade Policy Studies. Dan Ikenson, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So first, I want to start with a clip from Secretary of State Marco Rubio today talking about Trump's tariff plan.
Understand what that means. That means basically whatever some country charges us, that's what we're going to charge them. The goal the president has made very clear is he wants to reset the baseline of international trade, which he believes, and I agree, is unfair to the United States. This is not meant as a hostile move against Japan or Germany or anybody else.
So how would you define more balanced trade, and what would that look like for American businesses and consumers?
Well, I think balanced trade is sort of a mythical construct, particularly on a bilateral basis. In order to talk about bilateral trade, you really need to see exports as Team USA's points, imports as the foreign team's points, the trade account as the scoreboard. And we have a deficit, so that means we're losing at trade, and we're losing because others are cheating. That's not the right way to look at trade. Trade is a win-win, a positive-sum outcome. The United States maintains relatively low tariffs up until the first bout of Trump tariffs in 2018. The average tariff was about 1.4%. That's duties collected over the value of imports. So every country had different layers of tariffs on different products. And when the gap got started after World War II in 1947, countries came together and started committing to lowering their tariffs through a series of multilateral rounds. And there's a little bit of imbalance in there right now. We should get back to the negotiating table and get countries to reduce their tariffs further, to go back to that multilateral system that had worked well for a long time.
One argument, though, that administration is using is that some tariffs do address national security concerns. Here's another clip from Marco Rubio today. Watch.
In addition to that, there are industries that are critical to the United States and to our domestic security and our future. And he's identified them: steel, aluminum, semiconductors, automobiles. These are things that we believe are in our interest to have a domestic capacity, and we have to protect these industries from what we feel is subsidization and unfair competition from abroad.
Do you agree with that? And do you see potential national security implications of relying on foreign supply chains for these industries?
Yes, actually, there are national security implications. And for years, I was a pretty strong advocate for free trade and didn't give as much consideration to national security implications as we should. We have a system in which we had a rules-based system which enabled China, for example, to grow and use the rules to expand markets and improve their research and development and their production capacity. At some point, it became obvious that China and the United States are in a competition for technological superiority, and that involved stealing intellectual property, heavily subsidizing particular industries. I'm speaking about in China right now, for example, and forcing U.S. companies that wanted to export or invest in China to forfeit their intellectual property in order to do so. The Trump administration responded to that in 2017, 2018 with these Section 301 tariffs, which are still in place. I don't think it's done much to change the behavior of the Chinese government and Chinese industry. And in fact, I think we have adopted a lot of the practices that we were critical of back then. I'm not saying all of them are bad. I do think it's important to have some level of self-sufficiency in industries that are crucial, such as semiconductors, artificial intelligence, technologies of the future. I think calling the steel industry an industry that is of national security importance, I think, is a bit of a stretch. The world is flooded in excess production of steel. It's all over the place. Security is a legitimate reason for maybe export controls, maybe tariffs, targeted tariffs, maybe subsidies, but it should be the exception, not the rule, and we shouldn't stretch the definition of national security to include silly industries like sugar.
So you said tariffs might not be the most effective tool in countering unfair practices, say, from China. What are some of the more effective ways, you think, in us trying to push back against China's, for example, stealing of intellectual property and unfair trade practices?
Yeah. Well, so the stealing of intellectual property is an issue that came to the fore in the first Trump administration, imposed tariffs under Section 301. But at the same time, they started to develop, actually began in the Obama administration, concern about the kinds of technology that we were exporting to China. And the focus became, maybe we need to prevent some of our high-end technology from getting in the hands of the Chinese, since we're in a competition with them for technological preeminence. Let's limit their access. So we could say it was punitive because they were engaging in unfair practices like intellectual property theft and forced technology transfer. But it's also, a necessary way of staying on top. Now, a lot of people will disagree with me that, hey, by limiting China's access to our technology through these export controls, they're going to go elsewhere and purchase these products from other companies around the world as they develop their technology, or it's going to expedite China's homegrown capacity to produce these things. That's probably true. We need to weigh the economic benefits and costs against the national security benefits and costs, which are difficult. It's a difficult exercise because it's hard to quantify national security benefits and costs. But I think generically there is a legitimate rationale to engage in some form of protection for crucial national security intensive industries, but we should make it exceptional and not the rule.
Dan Ikenson, thank you so much for your insights.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The Trump administration is expelling South Africa's ambassador to Washington, Ibrahim Rasool. Secretary of State Marco Rubio today announcing the decision on X, saying the envoy hates America and President Trump. Rasool previously served the same position under the Obama administration. He has a long history of supporting terrorist groups, including Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Amid conflicts in Gaza, the diplomat has been advocating for anti-Israel and anti-Semitic causes. In a post on X, Rubio says, quote, "We have nothing to discuss with him, and so he is considered persona non grata."
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.